Welcome to the Treachery of Data podcast, the companion podcast for the CRO Roundtable, a bite-sized chunk of content summarizing a recent roundtable discussion topic. All right, this time we are going to talk about test velocity, and answering the question, it's the number of experiments over a regular period of time. All right, so velocity always gets a lot of attention as a metric. And it seems like a lot of companies and people focus on it. It's a common subject for people to be posting about on LinkedIn.
Yeah. But how useful is it really for a lot of companies? And that's what my I guess crisis of conscience was about. When I was kind of like thinking about, like, especially the last with the current set of clients and with the current particular client, I was kind of thinking the test velocity is all wrong. Focus on test velocity is all wrong for these guys. And the more I think about it, the more I think like you know, if when you think about like resources are always limited in a lot of companies, and you can either use those resources to spend time on analyzing existing tests and do deep dives into data analytics and put more effort into researching the tests before you put them out, building the metrics and then doing the analysis afterwards, or you can just start like you can just bang out experiments one after another, because there is a mistaken association that test results equate to insights. And for me, that doesn't that as a concept
Well,
doesn't necessarily hold true.
yeah, I was gonna say, what do you mean there? Let's get deeper into that a little
Yeah.
bit. Like the false association of results to insight.
Yeah. Well, if a test doesn't do well, or if it whatever a test does, the common sort of view is, well, at least we've learned something.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what we equate to, what it seems to be that we equate to, and I could be wrong about this, it could be a false assumption of mine, is that everyone sort of
There's
thinks,
a linear correlation there of, like, the
yeah,
more tests you do, the more insights you're getting, so the more things you can act upon or the more decisions that you can make and stuff,
yeah,
but
exactly.
that's really just a hypothetical, right? Like, that
Yeah,
doesn't.
that's a hypothetical, but I think it's
Yeah.
kind of based on the fact that, what they say. You run a test. Hey, let's find out if a hypothesis is validated or if a hypothesis is not validated. But the thing is that it's say you've got an inconclusive test, and say you don't know whether it's a hypothesis or the execution, which is the issue. And sometimes you'll have multiple factors changing on the test itself. Like there could be a design change, uh, as well as some additional content, as well as something else changing as well. So when you combine all of those things together, when you have an inconclusive test, and when you've been running these tests really quickly, you don't maybe have enough metrics to or analysis to do deeper dive in, because building metrics takes time. Then it doesn't seem like you could have an inconclusive test and you don't learn anything. And there's a lot of tests where I think that is the case, where unless you put in the effort beforehand, you're not necessarily going to learn something from that test. So that's what I mean by test results don't equate to insights necessarily.
Yeah, speed for speed's sake, like, you're
Yeah.
pumping out tests without backing them with, um, all the, like, pre-planning and prior work that
Yeah.
goes into it. Like, what's the source of your hypothesis? Like, what research data point did you use to come up with that hypothesis or something, right? Like, having it, like, backed by something else
Yeah. And
versus,
it's not even
the
how.
common term is sort of like spaghetti testing, right? Like, you're throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, and it's not even like you could even think about it like, we're not doing spaghetti tests. We're just, this is this is planned tests, and we just want to get like maximum number of tests out. And because of the limited resources, what I found tends to happen is like, okay, let's get it out quick, and then there's not enough thought put into the key thing, which is secondary metrics, like what kind of behavioral insights are we going to glean from this test? And when it comes to what kind of behavioral insights we're going to glean from this test, when the test concludes, somebody has to go in and do that deeper analysis, and that takes
So
time.
it
So,
it's an issue of, like, sacrificing quality over quantity. Like,
yeah, yeah,
you're increasing your output, but you're lowering the, like, quality of information that you're getting out of that because, like, you only have so many calories that you can spend actually like executing on experiment, right?
yeah,
Like you have a finite amount of resources that you can spend running the experimentation program.
yeah,
And to increase velocity, you also consequently need to increase resources. It's not like, I mean, sure, there's certainly ways you can do more with less and stuff, but you know, at some point you're squeezing blood from a stone and you have to increase resource allocation.
yeah. And instead, I think there's an optimal velocity that companies will have, or that teams will have, that there's an optimal speed limit that you can go at, and that's going to be really variable because each test is going to be quite
Yeah.
variable in terms of the amount of time you can spend. So
I mean,
yeah, so that
there's also technical limitations imposed on your speed. Like
yeah,
if you're only getting 10,000 visitors a month, you can't run 500 tests. I mean, hypothetically, you could run 500 tests, but
yeah,
that would probably like that's the quantity over quality. Exactly what was it? Like, how much information are you going to get off of 500 tests a month
yeah,
off of 10,000 visitors? Like the information is going to be strained so thin.
yeah. And sometimes it means like you have to, depending on where you are in, as a it's a strategic decision. It's something that we've said before as well. It might be, that going slow is actually a strategic decision that you make. So,
Mhm.
velocity being seen as a always a positive thing is really quite misleading and can be quite damaging to the quality of tests. And like I say, there is an optimal sort of speed. Like you don't want to go slower than you don't want to just drag your heels
Right,
for the
right.
sake of dragging your
Velocity is
heels.
useful as like sort of like at least a base baseline or a benchmark in the sense of
Yeah,
like where you know like we need to at least be doing something on some sort of regular cadence because if you're right if you go less than 55 miles an hour the bus blows up.
yeah, yeah.
Now one thing that we kind of forgot to talk about right off the bat is
Mm.
like why is velocity so popular of a metric? Um, I mean, I have some thoughts there in that velocity is a really easy way to prove that work's being done.
Yeah.
And so and it's also an easy metric to track
Yeah,
as
that was
well.
a point that I think that was a really good point Matt Skaysbrook made at today's conversion wheel roundtable. Is kind of yeah, it's just an easy in terms of like the other metrics that you could look at, and we'll go into those
Mhm.
in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But in terms of those other metrics, velocity is just a very simple metric that you can just track, and I think
Yeah,
that's why it's so popular. It's it's a yeah, it's a very specific kind of insight, isn't it?
yeah. There's also a big pitfall there of
Yeah,
like if you're using that as your measurement of success of like quantity of work that we're performing, right? Like, hey, look, we're running 8 tests a month. Like that sounds awesome. Like or you know, like or in comparison. Um, you know, there are ways that you can game the system,
yeah,
right? Like if quantity is the metric that your, paycheck is tied to, that, perversely incentivizes you to cheat at it. Not to say that anybody listening to this would do that. I'm sure everybody's a white hat CRO person here, but um, you know, if you were unethical person, you could do things like running gimme tests. Testing
Yeah.
testing really obvious things, like something that really you should just be doing anyway, or testing bug fixes. Like, if something's broken, you don't A/B test the fix, you fix it,
Yeah.
you know?
Or just kind of, yeah, and it's not necessarily they do it out of malice, but just
Right,
out of the
yeah,
fact
or
that,
yeah, yeah,
they can go, okay, so these are really simple tests that we can prioritize, and then it can look like we're running really fast. We can just
yeah.
do all of these tweak tests to make it seem like we're going like the clappers, but and then you
This
deprioritize some of those
gets
other
exactly
tests.
into your issue of, like, quality. Like, you're run you're running a lot of BS experiments there.
Yeah.
Like, you're not it there's not good information, like, insight, like, there's not good impact value off of doing those gimme kinda things.
Yeah. And the key thing is not necessarily, because in certain situations, in certain companies, test velocity, each test will give you an insight. So, but in majority of cases, I don't see that I don't see that correlation necessarily being there. So it's
Yeah,
kind of like, you know, think assuming that you're going to learn something from a test result. So if that's the case, then, and if the insight is what we are looking at, like, this is why it's so popular, because we think that these tests will equate to learnings, then shouldn't we be looking at some other metric, like a number of insights discovered or something like that?
yeah,
So
or
it's like
or
insight
actions
velocity,
taken, or,
actions taken.
um
Yeah.
or there was a really good one mentioned. I think Matt also mentioned this at the round table. Um, he said, Ronnie Kohavi has a metric around, like, percentage of changes that are tested.
Yeah, that was
Like,
Oliver
that
Patton.
oh,
Yeah.
Ollie said that, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
I
yeah.
yeah, yeah. But that was
That's
a
a
really
really
good
good.
like, that is a good, like, benchmark of, like, program success and evaluation of, like, maturity level. Like,
Yeah,
out of for all the changes that you're deploying to your website, your app, your whatever, how many of those are you using testing to validate that it's a beneficial change?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like, um, this analogy popped into my head last week was, you wouldn't evaluate, an engineer's performance based on the lines of code that they write.
mm,
Because there's ways to really easily inflate the line count of code that you're contributing, and also, like, just adding more isn't always a solution, right?
yeah,
Like, code refactoring, simplicity. Like, sometimes a reductive action provides more benefit than adding more. So, like, measurement of, like, increasing isn't always the best practice. And, like, you can see a practical example of that in the tests that you run. Like, how many of us have run a test of, like, removing something off of a page and seeing that cause a lift?
yeah, yeah. And those kind of tests are, I think, really good way if a company's there as a strategic sort of thing. Well, let's try doing a series of tests where we're just pulling stuff out. In that case, there you can, really up the velocity quite quickly, because those kind of tests tend to be quite simple. But that will only be for a limited window of time before you go back
You're
to
gonna run out of those, quote, "low hanging fruit," which is a term that I hate, but,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
all right.
like, right, you're gonna run your list of tests from your playbook, run out of ideas, and
Yeah,
then, like, have client churn, then the next one comes in, do the same thing over and over and over, right? That's the hypothetical, like, shitty CRO agency model.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think, like, and going back to your point about measuring by lines of code, because that's an easy metric as well.
Right.
So shouldn't we be looking at, maybe slightly more difficult metric, um, and instead be measuring on that? It's like,
Yeah.
and also, I don't know what your view is, like, in terms of how many companies do you think that test velocity is a good metric for? Because there are certain companies and certain stages of certain companies' test experiment program where test
Mhm.
velocity is really is a valid metric, but
Yeah.
but there are other times when it's just not, and other companies that is never a good metric for. So yeah, I wanted to get
Yeah,
your.
there's 2 things there, right? Like, serving as a functional baseline to say, like, "Hey, like, is work being produced at a reasonable cadence?" Um, and test velocities only even one factor within there, because right, because experimentation isn't the only thing that CRO practice does, right? There's also
Mm,
all of the research, the analysis, like recommendate, right? Like, there's all of the other work product in there as well. And so, if your velocity is limited by your traffic, well, you're just gonna have low velocity. Like, you can't, right? The old camel through the eye of the needle thing, right? Like, you can't force it through.
mm,
So what other activities are you doing as well, right? So that's just a factor. But
yeah.
then there's also, like, um velocity as a goal. Like, I don't necessarily think there's anything, like, specifically wrong with saying, "Oh, we want to increase, we want to increase the volume of tests that we're running." Like, having that as, say, a goal, but then planning out how to actually reasonably and sustainably achieve that. "Oh, we wanna go from, 5 to 50 in 3 months." Okay, that's completely unrealistic, but we might be able to go from 5 to 6, or 5 to 10 in a year, or something like, there are ways that you can do that, but you have to write, like, that involves
But
meta planning and stuff, and it's not that's like a long-term goal. It's not like a, performance metric.
but that's what I mean by, like, in terms of a goal, how how useful of a goal is it to want to go from 5 to 10 or 5 to 50 versus, some other kind of goal? I mean, the
Yeah.
the
Well,
typical
like
kind
most
of.
things, it's like most things in zero, it depends, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, it
yeah, yeah, yeah.
depends. I mean, the typical sort of thing is to say, "Hey, we have a win rate of 20%. If we increase our velocity to from 10 experiments to 20 experiments,
We're
well,
doubling the number of
we're
wins
going
that
to
we
have more
find, and we're
wins."
making more money. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and that's a common
Well,
sort of,
there's probably diminishing returns there,
yeah.
and B, like, I think evaluate velocity in relation to bandwidth. Like, do a bandwidth calculation of, like, how many hypothetically, how many tests could we be running with the amount of sample size and traffic that we get versus the amount of tests that we're actually running. Like,
Yeah.
are those in alignment? Are we under delivering? Like, if our bandwidth says that we could run 10 tests a month, but we're only running 1 test a month, like, should we then be looking at trying to do more?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of like, I think that. the thing that we came back down to saying on the in the roundtable call is that it's a metric. It's
It's not
probably
the
not the
metric.
metric.
Yes, 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 yes.
So
You
and
should
it
be looking
really,
at, evaluating test quality
yeah, yeah,
over velocity.
yeah. I mean, I know I've had scenarios where we've wanted to increase test velocity, and then we had many more error rates in terms of
Mhm.
invalid experiments being
That's a
rolled
good
out.
point too,
And
like
so just trying that, and then we had to track that,
mhm,
and then get that under control. And then the win rate was diminishing, and in terms of like going back to something that Ronnie Kohavi says in his book, is the idea of an OEC, overall evaluation criterion, and I think it's the same kind of deal with an experiment program, where you have a number of describing metrics working together to describe how your experiment program is going,
mhm.
and test velocity can be one of those. It's a useful one to be there, but I think it's a dangerous one as well.
There's
Like,
a hierarchy of importance, like
yeah, yeah,
quality, efficiency, quality of tests and quality of results are probably foremost,
yeah,
and then efficiency of program and process is something that you can look at,
yeah,
and then possibly velocity.
yeah. I mean, like I say, I've been erring on the side of, measuring insights, and I know that can be gamed quite
Yeah, and well,
easily as well.
it's also it's a loaded term because how do you measure an insight?
Yeah, I mean, it's insight in terms of, if you go into a test with some open questions, and then how many of those open questions have you answered? Like, so you have like a number of um, open insights that you wish to gather data about, and then you either prove or disprove those kind of insights. And I know it's also, I mean, any metric on its own is subject to, you know
Gamification, yeah. Like,
gamification.
you
So
right, right, you can't create a foolproof
yeah,
system, right, you
yeah,
just have to have honest actors within the system. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And like I say, it's multiple number of describing metrics to describe how your experiment program is performing. And that should include some metric about how many changes has the development team, has the company released without uh, uh, going through experimentation, instead of just releasing, and all of those other kind of describing metrics as well, depending on
Yeah.
where you are as a company and where you want to be. So
Yeah, like, something I've kind of been noodling around a bit is insight leading to action
mhm,
and measuring, like, ac actions taken as a result of insight gain. Like, like, we learned this thing, therefore we should perform this action or not take this, right? Like, your wins and your saves kind of thing, you know? And also, like, Sean's talked about this some, is showing the paper trail of, like, you track all of the research that you did, but then what did each research item lead to? Like, this research project led to 5, uh 5 actions. 3 of those actions were tests, 2 of those actions were just do it implementations or something like that. Like, you have, like, quantifiable, like, course of activity, right? And there can be, like, a reciprocal feedback loop there. Like, maybe a research action leads to more research, or right? Just like an experiment can lead to another experiment, or an experiment can lead back towards research. Like, what? at the end of the chain, what was uh, uh, like an implementation or like financial action taken, and trying to quantify and assign and measure that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of those kind of metrics are probably really good describing metrics, like I say. Probably slightly better than test velocity. I guess what the key thing that I'm kind of getting at is trying to take test velocity and explode it out. Like, why do you want to measure test velocity?
Mhm.
And then from that why, figure out whether or not test velocity is the correct metric, whether or not there's other metrics that you can use instead or as well.
Right.
And then, yeah, just kind of, build a better picture um, about your experiment
Yeah.
program.
Velocity and win rate are the two, like, I'm not gonna say junior level, but like introductory metrics where it's like these are like they're really obvious things, but like you really need to dig deeper
Yeah,
beyond them is kind of the point. All right.
cool.
Awesome. Anything else to cover there? I mean, I know there's some stuff for velocity and like how to actually increase velocity. Like, okay, moving up from like, okay, how do you increase your test load? And talking about like efficiency plays and things like that, like improving process efficiency and doing a lot of other stuff like
Yeah,
that we
I
haven't
think
even covered
Matt
yet.
had a
But
good point in
Matt
terms
had a
of,
very good post about this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, about it being more about the people that could be either dragging down velocity or increasing velocity and stuff like
Mhm.
that. They're a much bigger impact on
Yeah.
velocity.
Reducing institutional friction.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
among other things, which this could very easily be a follow-up subject. Could be maybe a good topic for next week's roundtable to cover
Yeah,
as well. Alright, awesome. Well, as always, if you ever have any questions, feedback, or if you disagree with something me and Iqbal said, you can always talk to us face to face at the CRO Roundtable every Friday. You can find that at conversionworld.co. If you're shy or you don't like speaking, you can connect with us on LinkedIn instead. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.